Good evening and welcome to the Transportation in Collin County Public Forum. I am Charlotte McKenzie, President of the League of Women Voters of Collin County. On behalf of LWV Collin County, thank you for joining us. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots civic organization where we use our collective voice for collective action. Our members and supporters are passionate activists. Nationally, we have members in all 50 states and more than 700 communities coming together, speaking with one powerful voice. Founded over 101 years ago, we engage nationally and at the local and state levels on legislative priorities and efforts to improve our elections, always working on vital issues of concern to our members and the community. Our mission is empowering voters, defending democracy. Being nonpartisan, we neither support or oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government. We believe that all voters should play a critical role in democracy. As an organization, we are fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. Locally, the League of Women Voters of Collin County is a trusted, nonpartisan resource, bringing vital information and communication throughout our community, affecting change that includes impactful programming and services that keep us connected and in the know. Tonight, you will hear more about a vital issue in Collin County. At this time, I would like to introduce our Vice President of Program, Stephanie Mace, who will provide an overview of tonight's forum.
Thank you, Charlotte, and good evening, everyone. As Charlotte said, my name is Stephanie Mace, and I am the Program Vice President for the League of Women Voters of Collin County. As Charlotte said, in addition to voter empowerment, the League of Women Voters actively works to increase the understanding of major public policies and influence improvements to these policies through education and advocacy. The League advocates on an issue when there is an existing League position that supports the issue or speaks to the cause. Without a position, action or advocacy cannot be taken. At our most recent annual meeting, our local League identified the issue of transportation as the topic we want to focus on this year. Our members approved us examining and updating our existing transportation position, and they also requested a public forum so our members and the community can learn about existing transportation options, strategies for addressing current and future transportation needs, and potential funding opportunities for transportation infrastructure. We have an impressive list of speakers tonight that'll touch on these and other transportation issues. I truly appreciate all of our speakers for being here tonight and taking time out of their evening to present their work to us. We also have an amazing moderator that will introduce each of our speakers in a moment and will also give you the run of show. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Lauren Doherty is an Allen resident since 2005, and she's also been a member of the League of Women Voters of Collin County since 2019. During her recent term as an Allen City Council member, she served on several City of Allen boards and committees, including the Library Board, Keep Allen Beautiful Board, Animal Shelter Advisory Committee, the Nominating Committee. Since moving to Texas, she has devoted her time to community service through CASA of Collin County, the PTA, and the Collin County Homeless Coalition, among others. She holds a degree in astrophysics from Princeton University and career experience in financial analysis, benefits administration, and real estate investment. She lives with her husband, Brian, and their two boys, Ethan and Jacob. Before I turn it over to Lauren, I would like to say a quick and heartfelt thank you to the League members that helped plan tonight's event. Mary Alice Garza, Ian Siemens, and Janet Imhoff. Thank you for your excellent ideas and your hard work to make tonight happen. Really, thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Lauren.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me to moderate this forum tonight. I'm very, very interested to hear from our 4 experts tonight on this topic. I think a lot of things are going on in the community regarding transportation, and to have all these 4 experts in one room is really an amazing opportunity for all of us to hear from them. So I'm not going to take up much time. I want to pass it on to them to give you their thoughts, and then I will hold space at the end to answer any questions that you may have. Please send your messages in via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen or the chat box, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible after the 4 speakers have given us their presentations. So tonight we will hear from Dr. Jandel Crutchfield, who comes to us from the UT Arlington School of Social Work. Ryan McCutchan, who is a transit planner for the Dallas Area Rapid Transit. Duncan Webb, who is our Collin County Commissioner from Precinct 4. And Brendon Wheeler, who is Principal Transportation Planner for the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Our first speaker is Dr. Jandel Crutchfield, and please, Dr. Crutchfield, go ahead and put up your slides and tell us what you have to say.
Okay, hello everyone. So let me get the slideshow started. I am grateful to be here. Hopefully, I don't see anything in the chat that says that my slides can't be seen, so hopefully you guys can see them. I apologize for some background noise. So in our neck of the woods, I'm out in Mansfield. We've had some power outages, so I'm unfortunately not able to present from my home. So there is some noise where I am, but I am going to get started just to share about an exciting opportunity that occurred 2 years ago, where the Collin County Homeless Coalition partnered with me and a few of my colleagues at the University of Texas at Arlington, and we're funded to do a research collaboration through the National Institute for Transportation and Communities. And so there are 26 slides. I have 10 minutes. So if you guys do have questions, of course, after we'll share, and I'm happy to share these slides as well. But some of the background information I'll try to run through so that way we can get to the meat and potatoes of what we did and what we found.
Excuse me, are you able to switch to a presentation mode just so that we can see it bigger on our screens?
Let's see, probably so. Okay, is that
better?
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
All right, so this particular funded project was to study the impact of the sweeping changes right in Collin County. And so again, this did occur fall of 2018, spring of 2019. So not very extremely current, right? But some of the issues are still the same. And so just the extensive growth, right, in transportation infrastructure in Collin County, and exclusively with Collin County. So what we did was hosted residents that qualified as environmental justice residents. And so some of you guys are familiar with that, meaning residents that might be lower income or other marginalized groups, and then those that were not. So basically we got a picture from every type of resident that lives in Collin County. So we did these focus groups where we actually talked to people in depth, but we also collected some survey data from about 200 residents there in Collin County. And so this is just to show how all of these different entities, we really appreciate all of the agencies, some of you guys may be on now, that gave us access to your clients or that participated in those focus groups and surveys as well. And so here's what we were trying to answer, right? To what extent did transportation infrastructure keep pace with economic growth, right? So is there so much growth that transportation infrastructure is lacking? What are the perspective of the residents that live in Collin County? And then also, whatever the pace is, how has that influenced residents' access, right, to things like housing, employment, healthcare, education, and social activities? And then lastly, are there any differences in the perspectives of people who are considered environmental justice populations, who are vulnerable in some ways, and those that are not? That was a question we also wanted to find out. So I won't spend time here, but one of our colleagues in civil engineering did mapping to just kind of demonstrate some of that growth over time. So you'll see what existing public transit happens in Collin County cities, and this is as of 2019 again. Only 4 of the 25 cities within Collin at that time provided city or community-based transportation systems, right? So those were McKinney, Allen, Frisco, and Plano at the time. And so this is just a picture of the population density in Collin County. And we know, again, that there's been extreme population growth over time. The increase of lower income residents, and actually with more people in terms of the influx, the growth, right? Some of those demographics have shifted outward. And so we appreciate our civil engineering partner who's able to kind of demonstrate the differences, the changes, right? And not just transportation, but right now, the actual population within Collin County. And so let's talk about the survey, right? So we surveyed people from 17 to 98. So that's a pretty good range. The majority of them were between 35 to 44. Mostly Caucasian, but pretty evenly split between Caucasian, African American in terms of race. Most had a college degree or at least a high school diploma. Most were married, and some were unemployed at the time of the survey. And so we asked kind of, what do you guys use in terms of your transportation, right? The mode of your transportation and how often. And so we see by far, right, that people are using cars, right? Personal vehicles daily, and even weekly doing some type of car share. So to sum that up, right, in Collin County, most people have vehicles to get around. And so DART, if you see here, a lot of people that responded to our survey, we didn't get everyone, right, was one of those that were rarely used, or things like the public bus as well. All right, and so here's the transportation modes for trips to work, which was an interesting question, but then also the split between, again, that EJ population and then the non-EJ. And so you'll see that, again, still, so especially for the non-environmental justice population, overwhelmingly, folks are using personal cars. For the environmental justice population, there's a little bit of variability there. You can see it's pretty evenly matched between white and non-white residents, but public transit is, right, a secondary option that people are using in that environmental justice population, although the majority is still personal car, right? And so this is an interesting finding as well, the preferred versus the typical mode to work, right? And so while people are preferring in the environmental justice to use a personal car, they might be interested in using something like personal transit. And let's see, see if I can highlight those. If you look at some type of active mode, and so when I mention active mode, it means so walking, right, or biking or something like that. So that also is something that folks were interested in that particular question in our survey. For the non-EJ, it's pretty one-sided there in terms of the personal car. So some of the barriers, right, to using public transit. Why do people, if they might be interested in using it or they have a preference for using it, might not? And so it's interesting where these things overlap between the EJ and the non-EJ populations. Inconvenience, right, for all users, for those who actually are using transit, cost, inconvenience, access points, right? So where do I access the bus, access the train, wait times. And so those are consistent across both groups, right, who have tried to use transit in particular. All right, so mode choice versus purpose of trip. And if you guys can help me, Lauren, with time, I'm kind of not sure where I am. I have about 10 or 12 more slides to go. So let's see. So the purpose of your trip, does that impact, right, the choice of transportation or transit that you use, right? And so again, we still see that in Collin County from these residents, a lot of people are still just using a personal car. Some type of shared mobility is often used by environmental justice populations. as well. You'll see for healthcare, right, trying to get to the doctor, that 15% there for the EJ population, and then active mode, meaning walking to something that's discretionary. So a social event, an extracurricular activity, maybe walking or biking or something like that. All right, so those are the main ideas from, let's see if I have time in the chat. Oh, 4 minutes. Okay. Ooh. All right. Well, so some themes from the qualitative analysis. So actually talking to people, right? And not just getting those survey numbers. So some of the major issues were with the existing systems, obviously, missing infrastructure, and then things that were faced by individual residents. So let me speed it up a little bit. This is just a slide about the different places that people talked about, but here are some of those biggest issues, right? And so it's good when you have the overlap between what people have said in the survey, different people, right, than we talked to in the focus groups, but some of these same issues are coming up, right? So the costs, the location of the stops, the frequency of the stops. And so here's some evidence, right, in words, not just numbers. So the economy has boomed. It's unfortunately, it seems that when that takes place, it's always big housing developments that happen first. And then people are like, oh, okay, now we got to expand the roads and create a tollway and do this and that. It's like they leave infrastructure for last. Public transportation seems to be one of the last thoughts on the list. And that's from a resident that lived in Collin County. So again, we were trying to figure out how well residents can access needs, where folks have not necessarily access to public transit, and then the need for potentially a county-wide or region-wide system. So these are some of those issues that people talked about, talking about how it's actually just work to get to work. For me to get to my job, I would have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, catch a bus, go out of the way, get on another bus, then get on the train, take me right down the street where I needed to be. It was a nightmare, but people are doing that. Accessing the doctor. So without the help, we wouldn't go. So this particular resident had some type of Medicaid assistance to go, but because of the lack of transportation infrastructure, wouldn't necessarily be able to go otherwise. So there are great doctors available, but they're not able to get there. Another talks about the massive wealth gap. It says we just haven't necessarily supported the lower to middle income bracket. Do I think that access has eased up for them as a result of the booming economy? No, right? So there's that mismatch between the economy's great, but how can people access it? And so let me move through some of the other issues: extra planning time, limited jobs or upper mobility faced by what people are dealing with in the current transit system. And I'm assuming I probably have even less time. So I wanted to talk about recommendations while I have a chance. So these are some of the things we heard in the focus groups, right? So an expansion of DART services, train lines, the stops, right? The frequency of stops, some type of intercity transit, especially for those out further in rural areas, that runs multiple times a day, sustainable ride sharing or some type of on-demand program, multimodal transit with access to residential areas, the option to not have a car. I thought that one was interesting, right? So people really don't, based on their current usage patterns, right, have that option to not have a car, to be able to hop on a train. And then lastly, a change mindset about public transit, right? So that it can actually help support the booming economy and not be a drain on it. So that is it. Let's check the messages. You guys are shouting probably. I want 1 minute. All right, I'm done. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crutchfield. You were amazing. You got through those slides so quickly. I know there's a lot of information in those. So anyone in the audience, if you have any questions or you want her to review any of those numbers or information, please throw your questions into the Q&A or the chat, and we will get to them after all 4 of our speakers have given their presentations. So I'd now like to give the mic over to Ryan McCutchan, who is a transit planner from Dallas Area Rapid Transit.
Good evening. Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening. My name is Ryan McCutchan, and I am a transit planner in the Innovative Services Group for Dallas Area Rapid Transit. And it is my distinct honor to speak with you tonight with the League of Women Voters of Collin County. Next slide, please. So I feel like this is a great segue based on Dr. Crutchfield's great analysis that she just mentioned, because one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about this evening is the bus network redesign that DART has been feverishly working on over the last 2 years. And as Dr. Crutchfield did an eloquent job of talking about the explosion of growth, especially in the Collin County area, this is one of the main contributing factors for why DART has actually gone through this endeavor to basically make our bus system adhere more to our riders. And so some of the elements that I'd like to discuss this evening is having a more core frequent service 7 days a week. And so what that translates to is still keeping the AM and PM peak periods with high frequent service, but also focusing on the midday and the evening time periods, where some of our routes used to be at 60-minute headways. Now we've trimmed them down to 40 or 30-minute headways so that, again, it focuses on more frequent service. Another service, again, piggybacking on Dr. Crutchfield's analysis, is adding a new light rail line, which will be the Silver Line, which is a 26-mile light rail system that spans the Cotton Belt corridor, or DFW to Plano. So it'll be our first light rail system that doesn't actually traverse into the downtown of Dallas. Another system that would be of great interest to the Collin County residents is the GoLink service, which is our 21st century on-demand curb-to-curb service in Collin County. And we also offer it in various parts of the DART service area as well. So just speaking about Collin County, we have 3 existing GoLink services: Legacy West, Far North Plano, and North Central Plano. Those last 2 services that are actually in existence, we are expanding those zones to provide greater access to new riders. And then we have 3 new zones: the South Central Plano, the East Plano, and the East Telecom. And another service that I'd like to bring to your attention is this GoLink pilot, which is basically allow people to travel in between the 3 existing GoLink zones: Legacy West, Far North Plano, or North Central Plano. So if you work at Frito-Lay near the Legacy area, you could take this new GoLink pilot all the way to our Parker Road station. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about some other services that are very similar. So the Collin County Rides is a service provided by DART, which is a rider assistance program for registered riders in Wiley, Allen, and the town of Fairview. There is eligibility criteria for this service where you either need to be a senior or have a certified disability, and enrollment is required. Residents that are registered in the program are able to travel anywhere within Collin County. The service hours are similar to our paratransit, which is Monday through Saturday, 5 a.m. to midnight, and Sunday, 7 a.m. to midnight. And you can book a trip through this phone reservation line. And our vehicles are wheelchair accessible vehicles or ride share. We also provide Uber Pool, which is ride share, to provide greater flexibility and supplemental service to keep wait times down and customer satisfaction high. Fares are calculated based at the time of booking, and we have a program account wallet which subsidizes riders' pay. So if you pay $5 into this wallet, we kick in $15 to give you a total value of $20. We can put up to as much as $500 in your wallet. At that point, you contribute $125, and then the funds you would receive are $375. Next slide, please. So the DART rides is very similar to the Collin County rides in terms of eligibility and that it's also a rider assisted program. So I do want to highlight the differences here. One of the main differences is service area. So you can see all the different cities that DART rides is actually available. So as far north as Plano, all the way down south to Glen Heights, and all of these cities that you see in between. The service hours are the same, and so is the scheduling of trips. Now, the one thing I want to bring to your attention that's slightly different is the program account wallet. At this time, you can only put up to $200 total value for a monthly basis. Next slide, please. So the next program I'd like to discuss with you is the Discount Go Pass Tap Card. So this is available in our service area, and if you have access to it, you can use any DART bus or train with this Discount Go Pass Tap Card. And the beauty of this Go Pass Tap Card is that if you're eligible, you can save 50% on regular priced fares. Another advantage of this is that you can reload your card at hundreds of participating retailers, online through our Go Pass app, or over the phone. And if you lose or your car is stolen, you never lose your account balance. So that's a great feature that we have to offer. And these eligibility qualifications or partners that you see down here, if you qualify for one of these programs, then you are eligible for the Discount Go Pass Tap Card. Next slide, please. So the last service I want to bring to your attention is something that is in the planning stages and will be come to fruition at the beginning of next year. And that's the McKinney Urban Transit District Shared Ride Microtransit Program. And again, going back to Dr. Crutchfield's analysis, one of the things that we're seeing is people want this 21st century on-demand style transportation. We can really thank the ride shares for that, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world. But this program is, again, a rider assistance program that's eligible for residents of the service area cities. And those service area cities are Salina, Lowry Crossing, McKinney, Melissa, Princeton, and Prosper. And again, this is also an eligibility criteria where you need to be either 65 years or older, have a certified disability, or be a low-income resident. That's based on HUD's designation. The service hours for the McKinney Urban Transit District is 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekdays, and on weekends, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We can schedule trips using our Go Pass app or our call center. And one of the beautiful things about our Go Pass app is that it's the region's app that's used both by Trinity Metro, DCTA, Star Transit, and obviously DART, and now McKinney Urban Transit District. So it's a very wide-ranging app used in the North Texas region. And I'd like to cover the fares because the fares are a little bit different than the other two programs I just recently talked about. So if you are eligible for this service and you travel between any one of the service area cities that I mentioned earlier, the fare that you would pay is $3. If you're traveling to or from one of the service area cities to anywhere in Collin County, then you would pay $5 for that trip. And what you'll see in years 2 and 3, there's a 5% cost escalation that's associated with each one of those types of fares that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the conclusion of my presentation today. But one thing I'd also like to promote is that I feel like it's a good synergy with this, this group that we're speaking with, is that DART is providing free rides to our polling locations on November 2nd. So you can use our Go Pass app or through our call center, use the Vote 21 promo code, and you can get a free ride to or from polling locations. Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, I'm back. I'm so sorry about that. My computer actually just crashed. So thankfully we were able to get back on before his presentation ended. Anyway, let's move on to Commissioner Duncan Webb, who is our Collin County Commissioner from Precinct 4.
Thank you and good evening. I do want to also thank you all for allowing me to be part of this program. Let me see if I can share my screen real quick.
Stephanie, if you can go ahead and share that for him, thank you.
Okay, I have 10 minutes, so we're going to speed through this. I, like Dr. Crutchfield, have a bunch of slides, so let's go to the next slide. As already has been discussed, we're over 1 million people as of the 2020 census. Our growth has been over 36% since 2010. On average, 81 new people come to Collin County every day. That means 20 new cars on average a day. And we need 20 new residential housing units per day. Next slide. This is a heat map of 2018, which isn't very long ago, 3 years ago. If you look at the dark bright red, that is severe congestion. Very little severe congestion existed in Collin County. It's projected at 2045, the entire southwest corner of Collin County will be in severe congestion. And if you actually saw a heat map of 2060, the entire west side of Collin County would be bright red. So that's what we're expecting long term. Next slide. I wanted to point out core functions of what a county does. Our primary responsibility as a county is to maintain the county road system. There are approximately 754 miles of county road that's in unincorporated areas and 112 bridges. TxDOT, as it's called, Texas Department of Transportation, which is controlled by the Texas Transportation Commission, is responsible for building and maintaining the state transportation system, which is state highways. And so keep that in mind. And then next slide. And then the Regional Transportation Council, the RTC, is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the DFW area. Its primary purpose is planning. It's composed of 44 members, of which 40 are elected across 12 counties. Just an FYI, there's 6, including Richardson, that's in Collin County, that are from Collin County of the 44. So keep that in mind, 6. They're responsible for guiding development of multimodal transportation plans and projects, determining allocation of federal, state, and regional transportation funds. That's a biggie. Selecting transportation projects and various other programs and recommending them to the Texas Transportation Commission. Nothing gets built in Collin County without the approval of the RTC. Just keep that in mind. And funds are allocated through the RTC. And then, of course, projects to be built also have to have the concurrence with the Texas Transportation Commission. The RTC is also coordinates all the services and makes sure the DFW area, which includes Collin County and all of its cities, comply with state, federal, and regulations and laws. Next slide. I've been on the RTC since my year after I got in, so 2011. It became obvious to me that growth was a huge issue here in the county. And I really felt that because Dallas County and Tarrant County are the big gorillas on the RTC effectively, that we need to put more focus on transportation mobility planning for the county. So at that point, I made a presentation to my commissioners court in February of 2016 and asked them to look at more strategic transportation planning, even though that's not our core responsibility. And I got them to unanimously pass a resolution to prioritize that we look at 4 corridors to be limited access roadways, which is equivalent of freeways. And one was 380, which is the midpoint of our county east-west. The second one is Highway 78, which is that red line east of Lake Lavon. The next one was a north-south freeway between the current 75, which is the bright red wide line, and the 78. And then the last is the outer loop, which is a little bit of that red line in the north, and then it turns into a dotted line and goes all the way around. The court unanimously has supported that, and we have moved forward with trying to implement solutions on all 4 of those corridors. Next slide. As part of that, I also convinced the court that we needed to take before our citizens a bond referendum. So in November of 18, we brought forth to the voters and asked them that they approve the sale of bonds for $600 million for, it says, high-speed roadways. Those are freeways, and $140 million for arterial roadways that feed into that highway system. The voters overwhelmingly passed the issuance of those bonds, and we have begun to sell those bonds and use those bonds to actually acquire land banks, some of the land necessary for 380 and the outer loop. We're actually building that segment between 75 and D&T, although it's just a 2-lane service lane. So we're acquiring right away all through those 2 corridors to the extent we can. Next slide. As part of my approach, I knew that sitting on the RTC that we needed an integrated approach. So in November of 2017, I asked the RTC and the mayors of our 6 largest cities to ask the North Central Texas Council of Governments and RTC to undertake and fund a comprehensive transit study. I knew I didn't have support on the court for that study, so I actually kind of asked the cities to help me get this across the goal line, and they did. And it was for the purpose of assessing existing conditions and developing short and long-term strategies for a public transportation system within Collin County. As all of you are aware, Collin County is unique in that only 2 of its cities are DART cities, and the vast majority of the cities and the land within Collin County is not within DART. This study was completed this month, the first part of this month. It was completed. It's 161, and here's the link to pulling it up and looking at it. It's very comprehensive, and I'm still kind of reading and digging through it. Next slide. As part of the RTC, which again is their primary purpose is planning, within their 2045 transit plan for Collin County and the Metroplex, these are the routes you see. The 8 is, of course, the extension of the red line for DART. 6 is there's a rail line that goes through Frisco all the way up to Prosper, which was part of the study as a secondary function. The green line is the silver line that was referenced by Mr. McCutchan. And then the light blue is an extension of that all the way into Wiley. And then 17, which is, I guess, a medium blue, that is ultimately going to be, or it can be, a high intensity bus line that runs from Legacy area over to the red line is what the hope is. We have enough right of way through the Spring Creek corridor to put that in place. Next slide. How am I doing for time? I'm okay. Next slide. This is our current Collin County transit services. As you can see, they're color coded. There's Collin County Transit, which is the green, which was already the Mr. Crutchfield talked about. There's Frisco Demand Response, which is handled by DCTA, which is Denton County Transportation Authority. And then we have DART, which is the yellow, and then kind of the harvest color, Collin County Rides, which again, Mr. McCutchan talked about, is the kind of harvest color. And I've kind of detailed each of these for you. Each of the Collin County Rides is going to be a subsidized debit card, which is already for eligible seniors and individuals with disabilities. Collin County Transit, which is McKinney, Lowry Crossing, Melissa, Princeton, Salina, and Prosper, is operated again by DCTA. And it's again for seniors, individuals with disability and low income. It's a subsidized taxi voucher. And then you've got DART, which they've already made a presentation. And then you have the Frisco Demand, which again is DCTA. So these are the areas that are going to be covered by various transit programs, either for 65 and older or individuals with disability, and some available to eligible low income. Next slide. How can the public get involved? talk to the county commissioners and county judge. I'm just one, as I tell everyone, anything we do requires 3 votes, and I'm one of them. Contact your local city representatives. Most public transportation is and the needs is within the cities themselves, and the cities are the ones that are going to drive those engines to put in public transportation. The good news is the Collin County Transit Study, I had buy-in from 13 of the cities that were part of the 45-person project advisory committee. We've all committed to continue to meet quarterly and try to push public transportation push it on and move it forward, I guess is a better way to put it. And then the last thing I said, submit comments to COG and TxDOT when they seek comments on projects and programs. That's a very important one. And then what's next? Collin County, we do our own mobility plan also. The last one was done in 2014. It was updated in 2016, right before I started pushing for some strategic planning. It will be updated again in 2023. It's made up of 15 county residents. Each of the commissioners get to appoint 2, and the judge, I think, gets to appoint 3. But they're heavily involved in the mobility plan. So if you're interested in being part of the mobility plan, there's a form on our website that you can submit your name and qualifications and background. And you submit them to the various of the 5 of us, county officials. And if there's openings, we generally look at those applications to make appointments. I think that's it. Hopefully I got within time. I think there's 2 questions. Commissioner Webb has meeting air quality standards impacted transportation planning. As everyone should be aware, the region is classified as non-attainment, and as a result, we have to take certain actions and try to bring our ozone layer levels down. It is a regional issue. The reason why Collin County is non-attainment is really not because of what's produced here in the county, but the wind pushes it from I hate to say it, from another county, adjacent county is where we get it, but we're treated as a region. And yes, it does impact transportation and dollars we get if we don't work to try to reach the ozone levels that the federal government has set forth. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Webb. And again, please feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A box or the chat box. And we will also get to those after all 4 of our presenters. And our final presenter tonight is Brendon Wheeler, who is a principal transportation planner with the North Central Texas Council of Governments.
Good evening. Thank you, Mrs. Doherty. Let me see if I can share my screen here. And make sure we start the slide. All right, great. Please let me know if you're not seeing my full presentation, and I'll take care of that. But otherwise, I'll assume y'all are seeing what I'm seeing. It's an honor to be with you all this evening. I have a great group of panelists, and I'll be touching on a few of the topics that some of the other panelists have discussed already. I will be presenting just a little bit on that Collin County Transit Study that Commissioner Webb referenced. And we appreciate his foresight in making that study actually possible by influencing and bringing the cities along to request that study to occur. So let's go ahead and get started on my presentation here. So speaking of the Collin County Transit Study, it was requested by the communities shown on this slide in the hatched color. So That would be McKinney, Frisco, Allen, Plano, Richardson, and the city of Wiley. This study is really focused on internal connections within the county. How do we make those transit connections within the county for trips that are staying within the county, as well as connecting those folks and trips to regional connections, namely the DART connections on the southern end of the county for those folks heading into Dallas County and commuting. We're also looking to increase transportation options through this study. As we've seen through several of the presentations already, it's an automobile world out there currently, and not unlike most of the rest of Texas. But because it is quickly urbanizing, we are needing more transportation options than simply single occupant vehicles. The purpose of this study was also to look at what are the funding options to bring transit along in these communities. There's a reason why there's a lot of communities that have not joined either DART or DCTA yet, be it maybe they don't see a need for transit, or they have difficulty joining those agencies and authorities because of the funding requirements. So that's one of the aspects of this study that we really wanted to look at, to understand better how communities could get involved and what are the options for funding transit, because local funding is a huge key in considering transit for these communities. We also want to make sure we included any private sector involvement. How can we improve private sector relations and get the private sector involved in supporting transit, be it through either land use decisions or partnerships with private companies in implementing transit to their facilities. And we've seen evidence of that in South Dallas and the southern sector as well. So we wanted to look at those options here. And as Commissioner Webb mentioned, we did look at as a companion study to this effort, how do we integrate the Irving to Frisco rail corridor in all these planning scenarios? That was as Michael Morris has mentioned, the transportation director for the North Central Texas Council of Governments. With the Silver Line being built, the Irving to Frisco passenger rail corridor is the next priority for the region from a passenger rail standpoint. So we wanted to take a closer look at that and see how we would be able to implement that here in the next few years. So we have a study that looked at that as well. So just as a brief overview of our study, what we looked at were, we started with looking at transit propensity throughout the county. On this map, you'll see different shades of blue in kind of tiny block areas throughout the county. Some areas have darker blue, others lighter blue, even to where it's almost very faint and it almost looks white. The darker blue areas, they tend to correspond with the higher densities in population, higher density in employment areas. Not surprisingly, you can see it there at the southwestern portion of the county, along major highway corridors such as US 75 in Plano and Allen and McKinney, as well as going north along the Dallas North Tollway on the west side of Plano and Frisco. You also see some there to the east along US Highway 78 in Wiley. But it doesn't only correspond with population. There's also, through our propensity analysis, we looked at where are the long trips, the short trips. We looked at aggregating different types of trips, looked at focusing on elderly, lower income trips, cities that made transit a priority for their community and thus would invest some way in transit. All these things layered into an analysis that we called our transit propensity analysis as a part of our final report for this Collin County transit study. And what that did is that helped us to shape transit scenarios for looking at how could transit work in the county, where are the needs through the transit propensity analysis, and now where can we provide service. And the scenarios were stratified by phasing, looking at what can we implement today in the next 5 years, what will we implement in 10 years, and then 15 to 20 years. So slowly building a system of transit, not trying to bite it all off in one fell swoop. The scenarios are also stratified by the types of cities in Collin County. So you have some cities that are maybe more mature and built out, other cities that are quickly growing, as the case for many of the cities in Collin County are quickly developing. And some of the cities on the outer ring are still in kind of the rural category. So looking at all those different cities, there's different contexts for how transit might look in those communities. We're not expecting some of the rural communities to be implementing buses. That would be unnecessary for their type of community, but maybe they would, maybe on-demand service or microtransit would be more applicable in their community for providing elderly or lower income access to medical services, grocery store trips, jobs, those kind of things. So putting all those together, you can see an example of one of our transit scenarios here, one of the more intense transit scenarios. And again, the idea is this would be phased in over time, but some of the major corridors shown here, you can see the silver line there along the southern end and that gray color that's being built today, and Dart's red line that goes into Plano. And just as Commissioner Webb mentioned, we looked at, there's obviously a need for north-south travel along US 75 from a public transportation perspective, especially when US 75 gets backed up with all the congestion, the continued growth going north-south for job commuting and so forth, back and forth between Collin County and Dallas County. We also included the Irving to Frisco rail corridor over there on the west side of the county in green. And as we mentioned, that goes all the way from Prosper and Salina in the north down through Frisco, Denton County, into Denton County, the city of Carrollton, and then on into Dallas County, the city of Irving. East-west there, you're seeing a purple dashed line. That's a express bus route, either high-intensity bus or some sort of fixed route service along 380. And what we're showing there in that lighter blue, maybe aquamarine color, if you will, that's that solid line. That is the current proposed route for the US 380 freeway that's TxDOT's working on. They're still putting that through the motions and finalizing that route, but this is kind of the latest we have so far, where it shows the loop around the north side of McKinney and Princeton and so forth. And we're just showing how the bus would fit along the existing arterial street connecting those communities. So again, just an example of some of the work that we did for transit scenarios. We also looked at funding, types of funding, where the funding would be coming from, either local or state or federal, the amounts of funding, how it would match to different services. For instance, implementing a rail line requires a more steady source of funding and a consistent source of funding, whereas microtransit, perhaps you can move funding around year to year within a city general budget to make that happen. For something like rail or even a few fixed route buses, you're going to need a more steady source of local funding income. Just for reference, since we're talking about funding, this is something we presented to the advisory committee for the Collin County Transit Study. Collin County is growing very quickly, one of the fastest growing counties in North Texas and in Texas and the nation, frankly. And over the last 10 years or so, about $120 million every year has been spent annually on improving roadways in Collin County. That comes through federal money through the North Central Texas Council of Government, the Regional Transportation Council that Commissioner Webb referenced. In addition, Collin County, there's local money that's around 35 to 40 million annually spent on roadways. So there's a significant amount of funding that is being used for roadways, and I'm sure there's more is needed. But just to give reference for the amount of money spent on roadways versus what's spent on transit, what's spent on transit is way, way less. And many of these communities aren't even a part of a transit authority. So their amount spent on transit is either for contracted services, like you've seen in some of the presentations earlier with Collin County Rides or the Frisco On-Demand Service or the MUTD in McKinney, where it's a small portion and it's not anywhere near the level of what a city would need to join either DART or DCTA. But anyways, just for reference, the amount, the equity between spending on roadway infrastructure versus transit is quite impressive to see. Another item we looked at was governance, and I've already kind of mentioned some of the items you've seen in the other presentations, kind of the patchwork of governing entities, either contracted services or transit authority of DART there at the southern end of the county. Again, what we are looking to do is how can we solve the patchwork of contracted services and different providers to provide us a seamless service throughout the county, as opposed to riders having to stop at the borders and transfer different services, and there being gaps in service between different communities. People don't travel just necessarily within the boundary of city limits. You don't even know when you're crossing city limits many times. So in our region, we're one big metropolitan area, and we're needing a bigger solution and a better solution, more comprehensive transit solution than simply a patchwork of services. So that's what this study aimed to look at and aimed to start the conversation on solving that issue. One last item I'll mention on this slide. I know I spent a lot of time on here, but it was actually Mrs. Doherty that discussed and the need for a white paper on the cost of not implementing transit for communities to use. As we mentioned, there's a disparity in the amount used for roadways versus transit. And many times when the cost for transit comes in, communities kind of balk at that and say, that's too much, we can't do that. So there is a cost when you do not implement transit, and we've qualitatively identified some of those in the white paper. I suggest, recommend y'all take a look at that if you're interested. Let me move quickly through the rest of this. So as far as the Collin County Transit Study, the recommendations were continued coordination among all the stakeholders. Commissioner Webb referenced that. And we're recommending a phased approach, again, starting slowly with on-demand microtransit service in more of a cohesive network, elevating it beyond just elderly and lower income to all rides, all first, last mile transit for all users, solving that patchwork of transit providers so that we can build a fabric to eventually build a transit network in Collin County. And at the bottom here, you'll see the link to the Collin County Transit Study. Let me jump forward to, so as I mentioned, the Irving to Frisco Passenger Rail Study. I won't spend too much time on here, but for the recommendations for that study, you can see the stations that we identified, the 12 stations along that corridor we identified there in the map to the left. We recommended also a phased approach, not building the line all at once, but coordinating with the BNSF, since it's an active freight corridor, on how can we implement a supply side approach where we strategically build sidings or double tracking at certain locations to save on cost, and see how we can fit transit vehicles, passenger rail vehicles in windows between freight trains. It may not be the best approach to attract ridership, but it's an approach that at least gets trains running. It starts to build those stations, the attractions for transit, and kind of starts the ball rolling. So again, trying to build momentum on this rail corridor because it's been around for a little while and nothing's happened on it yet. So we're just trying to build that momentum. Let me just spend a couple minutes talking about transportation funding. As far as Federal Transit Administration, FTA funding that comes to our region, that comes through the North Central Texas Council of Governments and is apportioned by urban areas, these UZAs. Dallas-Fort Worth Arlington is one UZA identified in the 2010 census, and McKinney UZA is also identified in the 2010 census. And so you can see those here on this map, the distinctions. By 2020, we expect some of those lines may be blurred. In fact, maybe McKinney urban area will be swallowed up by the DFW area and be one continuous UZA. And that will just affect how funding is apportioned by the FTA to COG and to the transit services in these communities. Let me, I'll come back to this slide if there's any questions, but we do have a transit strategic partnership program. I'm running a little long on time here, but this is 2% of the transit funding that comes to our region from the FTA. We set this aside for strategic projects, and it's a program that we have kind of accepting requests on a rolling basis for implementing pilot transit projects, mostly to connect where perhaps there's a transit provider that there's a gap in their service, and we want to connect that transit provider to maybe a transit authority area like a DART or a DCTA, Trinity Metro. So these projects help to kind of fill in the gaps between some of these providers. Finally, as far as the federal infrastructure bill, it's sitting in Congress right now. And in fact, I received word just earlier today that they may even vote on it tonight. So we'll see if that does actually pass through Congress. But just some aspects of that bill that we've heard. It is a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which is almost the portion of that is used for the surface transportation reauthorization is about double the last bill that was over the last 5 years, how we received funding from the federal government with gas tax and various other elements included in that. And in addition to just the typical surface transportation reauthorization bill, there was an additional $550 billion in additional infrastructure such as broadband, water, and other infrastructure to be spent. So of the surface transportation reauthorization funds, as I mentioned, it's about a 30% or so increase in certain core planning funding. So those are some of your surface transportation block grants, congestion mitigation, air quality funds, and various other programs that were part of the last FAST Act. But they also included some new programs focused on resilience, equity, carbon reduction, and electric vehicle infrastructure. And some of those can be used for transit-specific improvements. So we could probably talk on this for quite a bit longer, but I'll stop there and happy to take any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much. Obviously, there's a lot of information that's come out with the last 4 presentations. I don't see any questions as of this moment in the question and answer box, so I'll go ahead and ask some of my own if y'all don't mind. First of all, for Dr. Crutchfield, what would you say is the finding that is most concerning to you from your study?
Thanks for the question. I think the consistency across both groups, right? And so I think a lot of times people, when they think about transportation, hey, I've got a car, I can get around, lots of affluent folks, right, in Collin County, but the consistency and it really kind of was borne out in some of the plans. I was excited to see, plans from the other presenters today, is that what affects one resident affects another resident, right? So it is not just that, okay, vulnerable people can't get where they need to go, so hey, throw some programs out there for them. It is that map that was so jarring. I think it might have been, I don't know if it was Commissioner Webb or not, or if it was Mr. McCutchan, but the congestion, right? And so across groups, right? You should be concerned if everyone is saying that this lack of infrastructure is making it harder for me to get to the doctor, harder for me to access, healthcare, education, employment. And so that was something that was interesting that you might not have expected to find, that consistency across groups. And that's why we asked that third question, right? What were some of those differences there?
Okay, thanks. I think this would be for either Mr. Wheeler or Commissioner Webb. Did anybody have any insight into how much funding we have available to us through the state of Texas for these types of transit projects?
I think as Brendon and I both have said, that funding mainly is allocated through the RTC, because those are federal dollars being pushed down to the state, who then pushes it down to the RTC, and those funds, depending on, I mean, the positive is if the infrastructure bill gets passed, it substantially increases what we can expect as a state, and then of course as a region. And then those funds ultimately will be pushed to our projects, whether those are surface projects or transit projects. Generally, it's allocated, and Brendon can correct me if I'm wrong, normally it's allocated by category before it ever gets to the RTC. We get transit funds strictly for transit related activities, and then we get what I call surface transportation funds for roadways and thoroughfares and that sort of thing. And then of course there's other types of funds too that the region gets. I don't know if that answered your question, but I mean,
It sounds like the funds are coming from the federal government and then being allocated, but there aren't separate funds coming from the state of Texas from their budget that gets allocated for transit.
because they have, there's the state gas tax also, and those funds are allocated by the state. But again, those funds still, both the federal and the state funds work their way through the regions, to the RTC and the Texas Transportation Department.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner, while we have you, there's a question from the audience on when will State Highway 205 finally be done? Levon and Nevada are growing faster than we can keep up with traffic.
That's a tech stock question. That's I don't know the answer to that, because that's not in the precinct. That's so far, to be quite honest, that's pretty far east, and I have been I don't have any county roads in my precinct, which is one of the reasons I've been focusing on strategic planning, is because I'm very unique in that I don't have any county roads. All the roads within my precinct are either in the city of Dallas or in the city of Plano. So they maintain all of those. So I can find out the answer to that on 205. I made a note of it, but I just off the top of my head, that's so far out of my area, I don't track that.
That is a very specific question. So if the person who asked that would like to get in touch with Commissioner Webb, I'm sure he can find out an answer for you offline. My next question, I think, would possibly be either for Commissioner Webb or Mr. Wheeler. How do you coordinate all of the various political entities and authorities that are involved in something like a regional transit system in order to actually get this off the ground? I mean, we heard from you that the cities that are on, the representatives that are on the board that are looking at this study are interested, but then you have all of the individual councils and different entities that are needing to be elected and re-elected. And so how do you get that going with so many different groups?
And that's the reason why I was pushing for a transit study. We're unlike Dallas, which is dominated by the city of Dallas, which means, and then DART got in on the ground floor. So most of Dallas County is covered by DART, and likewise, BCTA covers most of Denton County. We're very unique in that we have a little bit of DART, two cities, Plano and Richardson, and the rest are outside of that service area. And so the problem is, I think Brendon mentioned it, I've got a situation where I've got effectively 11 cities who don't want to commit 1 cent of their sales tax to transit. Now that being said, I do have some cities, the 6 core ones that are in the map that are doing some paratransit and over 65 and what I call contract transit, who are willing to look at contract services, whether that's with DART or whether that's with BCTA. The Regional Transportation Council has taken the position that we don't want another transit agency in the region. We already have 3. We don't need a 4th for Collin County. that being their position, and I agree with that, okay? I think we should be able to figure out a way to bring these other cities in, either the DART system or the DCTA system, or a derivative system that's, because ultimately right now what's happening is DCTA and DART are beginning to work more and more together, because as Brendon and everyone has said, as I tell both of them, people want to go from point A to point B. They don't care whether it's in this city or that city, or if it's DCTA that's servicing them, or DART, or some other one. They just want to go from point A to point B in a reasonable, timely manner for a cost that they can afford. And I mean, that's it. That's the whole thing of transit. And so trying to get these cities, and I think the bigger cities have more resources, and trying to negotiate something has been the challenge. And it's going to continue to be a challenge because of the fact I've got a core function of a core of the cities that don't want to expend 1 cent of their sales tax, and I can't force that. And then I've got the DART members who have been paying in for 20 plus years, who go, well, shoot, we've been paying in for 20 something years, and all we have to show for it is one light rail line and 2 stations and some busing. And so it's a real political quandary that I am trying to solve and trying to build consensus. The good news is the transit study has started all of our cities to start to talk, and I'm trying to continue to push them and get some leadership on those cities so that we can come up with a comprehensive plan. That's where we are at that point with regard to transit overall for the county.
Well, thank you for shouldering that work, Commissioner Webb. I'm going to go to some questions from the audience. How does the average citizen influence future decisions on infrastructure and transportation? And this question can come to any of the panelists.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. How does the average citizen influence future decisions on infrastructure and transportation? How do residents make their voices heard and become influential in the space? You mentioned a committee that they could join, but are there other opportunities?
From a county perspective and the city's perspective, I think you've got to vote, number one. Number two, you've got to talk to your council people and your commissioners court members and impress upon them your ideas and your needs and your position. But as I tell people, you've got to engage, and but you also have to vote, because as I tell people all the time, the people I hear the loudest from, the first thing I do is I go and see if they vote. Okay, now should I do that? No, I mean, I try to honor everyone's wishes. I try to listen to everyone, but the ones that vote get my attention a lot more than the ones that don't. I'll just be very blunt. And that doesn't matter. And I don't know whether they're voting Republican or Democrat. All I'm really interested in is, do you vote? But I do try to reach out to and listen to all my constituents, and again, try to, but I think that's one. Number two is when there's public input, man, get out there and whether that's COG or TxDOT or whatever, you need to be a part of that. I mean, I just went to a major presentation on 380 for the entire length of 380, which again is 20 plus miles or 30 miles. And we had 100 people there. That was it. For a major project that's going to be $1.2 billion. And most of that funding I have. Now I lost about 600 million of it when the commission took it away from me a month ago, but I've got some opportunities to get it back. But that's a major project. And so I think you've got to get involved, and you've got to be part of any city's structure also, in terms of being engaged with them. That's all I got. I'm sorry.
Mr. McCutchan, do you have any advice for how residents, both within and outside of the DART area, they can get involved in potentially helping to expand it, or if they so desire to try to prevent expansion? Not that you talked about that, but.
Well, I think first I need to echo exactly what Commissioner Webb said, because that is the ultimate way of speaking to your local elected politicians. But another way is think about it from the business perspective. Maybe talk to your employer or your HR department to see if there's opportunities for people that maybe don't have access to reliable transportation and there isn't mass transit that's accessible to them. So there are other programs that all of the regional transit agencies provide, DCTA, DART, and also Trinity Metro programs such as Vanpool, which might be a good option for individuals to pull their resources together if they come from zero car households. That it might be another form of transportation. And then there's benefits with that they could use HOV lanes because they have enough people to qualify for that. They reduce costs on, their own personal vehicle if they use that. And even some employers provide subsidies where they will actually pay for a portion of certain Vanpool programs. And then there's also other options. I think that I heard earlier is active modes of transportation, trying to talk to local politicians about bike shares. And I know that might be something that is frowned upon based on the experience, especially in the city of Dallas. But Trinity Metro has a great program through the B-Cycle program where they have a docked bike station that seems to be doing really well in terms of ridership. So there's other avenues. It's just a matter of finding people that have an appetite for that. And then also, conveying those messages, to their local politicians, or again, to their employers who might have a little bit more clout with said politicians.
And while I have you, can you expand, or are you able to expand at all on that collaboration work that you're doing with DCTA? Because obviously Collin County is served by both of those entities.
So are you speaking to the MUTD project?
I'm not sure.
Well, obviously DART works hand in hand with DCTA on various projects, but with the McKinney Urban Transit District project, we initially, when it was brought to us, we worked with DCTA on this, and DCTA had to back out of the project. Basically, they didn't have all of the resources that they needed, and they're also working very tirelessly on their own transportation network. So that's where DART, the DART Mobility Services Local Government Corporation, which is DART's service that works outside of our service area, that manages these types of programs. So that's where we are working with the city of McKinney and the McKinney Urban Transit District to provide this new transit service that, yes, it is very similar to the Collin County program that DCTA ran. So from the DCTA perspective, we're getting information, learning about lessons learned, how to improve the service, primarily through using our GoPass integration so that people can book trips on their smartphone in the future.
Okay. And now I live in the city of Allen, and we have a relatively small program that assists the elderly and the disabled, but it does not serve the working poor. Are we potentially going to be able to expand that program to include them? Will it be something that expands to other cities? Are other cities asking for it? Because I think a lot of employers are having trouble getting their employees to work in Collin County or from outside of Collin County, and they are not necessarily people that can apply for that program that we have.
Well, for the McKinney Urban Transit District, low-income riders will be served by this program. So that is a major benefit and a little bit different from the Collin County rides and the DART rides program that I mentioned earlier. So there is potentially the appetite for doing that. Again, we rely upon either the HUD or the home HHS department to set the poverty level. And so our programs typically serve individuals that fall below 150% of that poverty level. So that's how it applies to the McKinney Urban Transit District. Again, I'd like to highlight the fact that, you know, for those that are low income or zero car households, pooling together with other people might be a good resource, again, for van pool programs. I know that there's some geographic constraints that need to be overcome with that, but it could be another viable option for these groups where mass transit is not an option.
Thank you. For Mr. Wheeler, I think you briefly touched on this, but when you're living in a suburban community like most of us are, we have arterial roads and then we have our little neighborhood roads that usually these mass transit systems don't reach. So how do you solve that kind of last mile problem for the rider who might be dropped off on an arterial road and then has to get 3/4 of a mile to their own home?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So, in our study, that's part of the issue we were looking at in our recommendations for instituting microtransit as part of the first phase. And we really do feel like microtransit helps to solve that first last mile issue. So you may have an arterial street, say for instance, sometime in the future, maybe it has a bus route, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a long arterial street with residential on both sides for a long distance. But we would be looking to connect those neighborhoods with certain transit hubs. We'd be looking to perhaps there's not even a need for a bus route along those arterial streets, but you're allowed to find those major arterial intersections where you may be able to institute a transit hub and some sort of radius around that transit hub where microtransit is able to offer those solutions. So once you leave your home and you find those microtransit options to get you to the transit hubs, then you're able to take a regional connection, either rail or big route bus or something for the rest of for more the long duration of your trip. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Commissioner Webb, did you have something to add?
I completely agree. I think that's the long range vision, is you're going to have transit hubs with micro transit, going from those hubs out to where they need to go, the last mile, as you call it. I think that is ultimately where transit is going to be the most cost effective. As I told someone, I said, there's going to be a huge game changer once you're going to have driverless vehicles and you take the payroll of the driver out of the system. And then at that point, microtransit becomes very cost effective. And that's why you see our cities in Collin County are using a derivative of microtransit for what you see the services they're providing to the 65 and over and the disabled. That ultimately is what I suspect is going to happen. You're going to have these major transit corridors like the Red Line, the stations, and then microtransit. Just think of Uber effectively going from that to their house or to their work or vice versa. I mean, that's where I think transit is heading. And that's also going to be where it's heading probably in Dallas County long term.
Okay, well, I think we're all out of time for questions. I didn't see any additional questions that we missed, but you should be able to reach out to any of our 4 experts on our panel if you have any that come up later. And I'm going to pass the mic back to Charlotte to close us out for the evening. Thank you all for your time.
Great, and thank you, Lauren, and also to our esteemed panelists. This has been an extremely informative and educational forum this evening. And also thank you to our attendees. We appreciate you being here. If you have an unanswered question, please be sure to type it in the Q&A box and we will get the answers for you. Also, we invite you to get involved in some way with the League of Women Voters of Collin County. We are a 501c3 organization, so donations and membership dues are tax deductible. We welcome you to join us as a member, a volunteer, or sign up for our newsletter, which can be found on our website at www.lwvcollin.org. Also, be sure to follow us on our social media, Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again as we continue empowering voters, defending democracy.